So just before I get into this video, I just want to make a quick note that these videos going from volume 1 through 8 will be going over not just the actual light novel itself, but also the differences between the light novel and the anime, just for those kind of fans that want to know the differences when it comes to light novel versus anime, and just my overall thoughts of the journey going through volumes 1 through 8. But I just wanted to put a quick disclaimer there for those that are wondering why I'm still doing the more up-to-date volumes as well as backtracking through volumes 1 through 8, because I haven't ever actually talked about them properly and thoroughly. But I will definitely say volume 1 for me was quite a shock, because going into volume 1 I thought this video was just going to be me basically stating what was in the volume and going, yeah, not much is different between the anime. But actually, to my surprise, there is actually quite a bit different between the anime and the light novel. And I had to make a lot of notes on paper because there is a lot of stuff that's missing from the anime that's in the light novel, but there's also a lot of stuff that's in the anime that isn't actually in the light novel. And there is definitely little subtle differences, and there's even some stuff that's also been shuffled around. The only thing that was actually shuffled around was the Miltan situation, where Issei ends up doing a contract with Miltan and ends up sort of meeting this individual that wants to become a magical princess. In the anime, it actually happens a lot later on, and that's basically it. Argier gets introduced and then Issei meets Miltan. But in the light novels, Issei meets Miltan before Argier gets added to the team itself. So there's a big difference between the actual pacing of the anime itself. Now, the stuff that actually gets added actually happens mostly in the early stages of the anime, particularly in episode 1, which is of course how they introduce Kiba, Koneko, Rias. Not so much Akano, she kind of gets a little bit introduced, but she's more just a standing, kind of giving a bit of thought process into Rias' sort of thinking when it comes to Issei and the interactions that are going on, because again, Rias is kind of sort of eyeing off Issei as a potential piece of her new team, and that's kind of showing off that these members are part of a bigger thing that's going on with Issei. And then it basically goes into Issei meeting this girl that asks him out, and then he ends up getting killed. But that basically is kind of a bit more of an introduction. And I do like the pacing, actually. I like the fact that there is that difference there between the light novel and the anime, because in the light novel things go very quickly, which I actually like that about the light novel, but in an anime form it would go too fast paced. So having that bit of an extra slow down moment to introduce the other characters, I actually really like what they did there. But very quickly does it actually have some stuff that's not in the anime that is in the light novel, and mostly that's to do with Issei trying to work out what's going on with his body. He actually goes for a walk out in the night on his own to kind of get a feel for what's changing in his body, and he notes multiple times that he's more active and feels stronger and just more energetic during the night than during the day, and during the day he feels really kind of very down in the dumps. It's almost basically he's become almost like a vampire in a sense, the way he describes it, but in this sense he's of course a demon. And so it basically flips the switch on him. He's constantly tired in the morning, he feels energetic and really on top of the world during the night, which allows him to basically see things better, hear things better. And when he went for his walk during the night, he was able to walk and run a lot faster, because again, his body just feels a lot more vibrant and more powerful. And that is something that isn't in the anime, but I understand why, because it doesn't really need to overly emphasize on Issei's body changes, and it kind of gets explained bit by bit as the anime sort of introduces the other cast and the changes going on. Another thing that isn't actually in the anime, and it's more of a change to the actual story itself, is that when Rias in the anime asks Issei to try and sort of use the strongest part of his body and try and sort of imagine it in a way so that he could try and summon his boosted gear, he tries to use his arm in the anime, but it actually fails. And he's only able to summon his boosted gear when he gets into a confrontation with a fallen angel, and that's where it's the third confrontation. And what I found quite interesting is actually this does not actually happen in the light novel. In the light novel, there is no third attack on Issei. There is only ever two. There is, of course, the attack that he has from the girl that he has a crush on when she ends up killing him, and then the second one, which is the young angel fella that ends up trying to kill Issei, and then Ria steps in and says, no, he's one of mine, toodaloo, go away. The third attack never actually happens, which never leads to Issei ever summoning his booster gear during that fight or confrontation, and instead he actually summons it during Rias' sort of introduction induction into it, saying, here you go, use the most powerful part of your body, try and envision it, and then try and summon it. And that's where Issei actually summons it for the first time. In the anime, he never does, and he just fails. And there's a bit of a comedic reason why in the anime, but that never actually happens in the light novel, which means the third angel was never introduced as a proper sort of main plot point in the actual light novel itself. They are mentioned later on near the end of the actual volume itself, where Rias ends up actually killing them, but even then that scene in particular is actually quite different because it never shows Rias and Akeno actually defeating them. It only mentions that Rias did that in front of the fallen angel just before she ends up killing her for Issei, because of course she was tormenting Issei. There is quite some differences. There are characters that aren't really shown, but more just mentioned about. And I don't think this is any bad changes. I think it still stays core to the actual story itself. There isn't any vast changes into how the story plays out, and it doesn't change entire major plot points. But I will say there is definitely a little bit of extra monologuing going on in the actual light novel itself. It does have some extra conversations between Rias and the mother and the father, just kind of some back and forths going on. And there is some more conversations going on between the Exodus that is trying to, of course, defeat Issei and the gang. And there is definitely a lot more cruder comments coming from the Exodus himself. He is way more cruder in the light novel than in the anime. At least for me, I found some of his remarks far more harsher. Like, there are some things that he says that is kind of like, whoa, he really said that? And there's even a scene that's actually removed out of the anime where he actually makes a return and sort of hints at the idea of saving the fallen angel that was about to be defeated by Rias, of course, the girl that dated Issei. He jumps back and he talks about, of course, Azazel, Sensei as we like to know him now, but he does mention about him and saying, oh yeah, he sent orders. He said, nah, I'm not going to help you anymore. And then she says, please help me, I'll do anything. And he mentions a very harsh comment in there that I'm not going to repeat in this video, but he mentions something in it and says, oh, will you do that for me then? She kind of hesitates and she's like, this isn't the time, save me, save me. And then he ends up leaving. That confrontation never actually happens in the anime, and it kind of makes sense. There are definitely some remarks that he says that I just don't think would be appropriate in an anime, and I think it kind of adds a little bit of a gem in the light novel just to kind of show just how crude he was as a human being. And it's something that if you do want to know what he says, I definitely would recommend reading from volume 1 onwards to kind of get an idea of just the kind of person he really was in the light novel, because he's far worse than even in the anime. And I thought he was bad in the anime, but ugh. But overall, this is kind of a volume that really establishes the basics for Issei. He's readjusting to a new life. He's trying to become a better person. You can notice straight away that he is growing quite quickly in the first volume. In the anime, he always kind of maintains that kind of silly persona, but in the light novel, at least for me, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below, but you can kind of see the massive shift in his attitude from the very beginning, where he's a little bit rough around the edges when it comes to certain things. And even then, there were particular scenes that were still different, particularly when it comes to the peeping hole. He never actually gets beaten up by the girls. He ends up running away because he sees a bunch of males walking past. That's another scene that's slightly different. He's not as, I would say, weird in the actual light novel. At least for me, I feel he's a little bit more grounded in the actual light novel, and he's a little bit more respectful, which I actually found quite interesting. But he changes very quickly in the light novel as well. His attitude, he just kind of, you can feel the monologuing going on, the way he's trying to readjust, the way he's trying to show respect and care and sort of forward thinking when it comes to what Rias wants from him, because Rias is disappointed in some of his actions because he makes, you know, mistakes. He's not the perfect demon out there. He's sort of learning and growing and sort of grasping how their day-to-day activities go, handing out pamphlets, doing contracts. Because he fails 2 of his contracts very quickly, he feels like a failure. So he's constantly evaluating himself and trying to do better. In the light novel, it's a lot more prevalent. In the anime, I wouldn't say it's so much, but again, that's just personal opinion of how I perceive the light novel. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And then from there, that's where he meets Asia, and that's where their connection really kind of brings together, and you can feel Issei really build a bond towards her because she treats him kindly and doesn't treat him differently like other girls do. And so he builds a connection very quickly to her, builds a sentimental attachment, but because of the differences between the fact that she serves the church and he's now a demon, there is that rift which makes it hard for him to kind of want to cross that line, but he ends up crossing it to try and save her. And I do love the way Rias comes off a lot more like she had this all planned all along, and you can kind of see that. Even though, yes, in the anime it does show that as well, it's just those extra little monologuing moments and those extra little conversations that go on between Rias, Issei, and even Kiba. Kiba and Issei have a couple of extra little minor conversations that aren't in the anime that kind of highlights that even they knew that Rias had this planned all along, and they were trying to say, Issei, you need to be sort of more proactive in your actions. And I just feel like that's a major scene for Issei to make the first step forward in maturing. There is definitely a lot of emotional baggage that is on his shoulder, and I do notice in the actual light novel itself, he mentions about his ex a lot more. In the anime itself, it isn't as prevalent, but in the light novel, he mentions his ex a lot more, and just how bitter and angry he is about what she did to him, and how he really did actually have feelings towards her. You can feel the emotional trauma that he went through, and just how much they tried to mock him over it. The fact that, you know, he felt something, she didn't care, and it was all just a game to her. It was all a big role play. And that is his major step forward in trying to overcome that, but he's still very much traumatic over it. And then, of course, Argia ends up joining the team itself because, of course, she's been brought back with, of course, the healing ability that she possesses. So she plays a very important role. And that is where Volume 1 ends, which is episodes 1 through 5 of the anime. And I definitely got to say, there is a lot of episodes between Volume 1, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there is a lot of extra scenes added in the early stages, with a couple of more sort of shuffled around when it comes to Rias and the other 3 angels that she meets before she goes into the church itself. And that's why I think it took 5 episodes to go through Volume 1. But I don't mind the fact that the first 5 episodes had that pacing in mind, and I'm now interested to see from Volume 2 inwards what the changing was. Was there much of a changing, or was there a rearranging in pacing? We'll just have to find out, but I'm very interested to see the differences of that, because I didn't actually think there would be this many differences between the anime and the light novel. I thought it would be almost very close, or at least close enough that there would be only minor differences. But overall, love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What are your thoughts about Volume 1? What are your thoughts about episodes 1 through 5 of the anime? Love to know it in the comment section down below. But if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe for more anime content, and I will see you beautiful nerds in the next video.